name is Joshua Henry Jenkins, and I am an interactive media strategist and arts marketer. And I'm also a community builder. And I'm really excited today to bring the 5 things that I wish somebody told me about marketing for creatives. So let's get things started. So, who am I? So before we even really jump into the things, I guess I should introduce myself. So I'm a number of things. I am a rural North Carolinian in the States. I am degree down, as I like to say, but I'm, someone who's also got a lot of student loans. So I went to school at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and also Elon University. I'm an arts and culture lover. Lifelong. I'm also a caretaker. I am someone who takes care of my elderly mother, who lives in North Carolina. I currently live in Washington, D.C. I'm a thrifter. I'm a playlist curator. I love vinyl. And I'm a hustler. Like most people, I have a bunch of side gigs and side hustles that allow me to flex all of my creative muscles. So I'm all of these things. I think it's important when we show up and have conversations like this to bring every facet of who you are to this work. It will inform what you do, the work you do, and how you do your work. So for example, my life in Washington, D.C., paired with my rural upbringing in North Carolina has really given me a unique vantage point to understand things like impact. Another example is, I mentioned that I caretake for my mother. It's a privilege to be able to assist her through this aging process, and it has drastically shifted how I show up and how I leverage the balance of work and life. So for instance, now the weekends are mine. Oftentimes they're hers, but when they're not, time off is really necessary and restorative for me. So I always ask folks to ask these questions of themselves. Who am I showing up as? What are my needs as a human being? And how can my work serve me best? So that's a little bit about me. Additionally, when we go down to the LinkedIn profile, the thing that, a lot of folks really care about, which is titles and roles, here's what I've been up to or what I'm currently up to. So actively, I'm currently the director of marketing at a theater organization called Theater Communications Group. It is a membership organization for theaters around the country. I'm also a freelance communications and marketing professional. I'm also a community organizer. I also have, currently I host a podcast. I'm also a designer, a graphic designer by trade. And then I also am a facilitator of conversations around equity and inclusion, specifically in the arts. Formerly, I was the director of web and media for a similar arts organization. I also was the board president of an organization called the Arts Administrators of Color Network, supporting arts administrators of color all around the country. And I have done my fair share of podcast production as well. So, I say this not because I love the hierarchies and the titles and things, but I'm actively all of these things. I bring all of these experiences of what I'm doing currently, as well as all the experiences of what I've done before to the table whenever I have conversations around creative marketing communications. So for me, all of my work can really be mapped back to a couple of things. We live in a gig and side hustle sort of economy right now. We have multiple sources of income. We have multiple avenues of creative expression. And it really doesn't matter what you do and how much you do. What matters is the story and the narrative and the through line. So for me, all of my work can really be mapped back to arts and culture, amplifying marginalized voices, creating community where there is none, and the preservation of legacy. So let's get into it. The 5 things that I wish someone had told me about marketing for creatives. And this is a conversation that I think can be applied to anybody, no matter where they sit. If you're an artist, an individual artist, if you're a musician, if you're an actor, if you're an organization, if you're a big organization, if you're just starting an organization, I think there's something to glean from these 5 things, hopefully. So number 1. We have to identify our audience. And this is where it gets really, really, really specific. We need to understand who is the person we're trying to talk to. Who is the ideal consumer of my work, my art, my product? And who is the actual consumer right now? So sometimes those things are different. Sometimes we want to make sure our art moves in a direction and lands at the feet of certain folks that it currently doesn't do. And sometimes the people who are actively engaged with us are different from that audience. So you've got to start by digging and doing the work to understand who is your audience, especially if you're starting something from scratch. So who you want to be listening to you, and who is already tapped in. So you have to figure out ways in which you can gather that data and ask those folks who they are. All decisions that you make about your marketing or your communication of your art really should stem from what you know about your audiences. And so the second thing is to talk to who you know is listening. So once you know who your audience is, you have to curate all of your efforts to meet those folks where they are. So what you will know, or what you know, like the education levels of your audience, the locations of your audience, those will shape the way you talk to those folks. I think it's been universally sort of said that folks shouldn't be writing any marketing or communication that is beyond the 8th grade level. That is how we make language accessible to folks. And we need to be able to make data-informed decisions based on that information. So I like to use this example a lot for the musicians who might be listening. I believe the artist is Bryson Tiller, but Bryson Tiller in the beginning of his career knew he had an audience because his Spotify number said so. And so when it was time for him to tour and go around the country and try to support his art with live performances, instead of just picking cities that everybody goes to, what was done was that he actually looked at the Spotify data, because the data allowed him to look and understand who was listening and where. And so he actually built an entire sort of tour based on where he knew he had the most amount of listeners. And what that did was that actually meant that some folks and some cities that he was selecting were really off the beaten path, but he knew he had a fan base there. And that's important because you're meeting folks where they are and you're giving them what they need. That's substantiated and solidified his fan base going forward. So data-informed decisions really do make a difference. So number 2, create a consistent relationship. This is really made up of 2 things. You got to set a schedule and you got to make it realistic. So when I say setting a schedule, I usually ask the question, how often will you communicate with your audiences? And also, what is reasonable and achievable? So how often you communicate is really important. So if you want to talk to your folks every day, sure. If you want to post across your social every day, if you want to send emails every day, sure. But is that reasonable and achievable? What we need to do more than just message is to actually set a schedule and a consistency so folks start to understand and expect communications from you on a rhythm and a cadence. So instead of just sort of piecemeal, I have something to say today, maybe we set a schedule that says I drop messages across all of my social 3 times a week. And then we do those things on the same day, around about the same day. So that way we start to build up an expectation that folks should be expecting something from you. But we've adjusted it and made it reasonable so that it's not too much of a lift for you as the creative. So making it realistic is really important. Many of us are gig workers. Many of us are carrying multiple hustles. So time is really a precious resource. We talk about money as a resource, time is a resource. So it's not so much about how much you can push out, just as much as it is about how reliable it's coming. So for example, podcasting. I know a lot of people love podcasts, but the worst thing you can do is set up a podcast and then go MIA for 3 months between episodes, and then come back and then go MIA for a month and then drop an episode. What is the rhythm and cadence that feels good? You don't need to have a weekly podcast if that's not sustainable. What is sustainable might be a season where you say, I'm going to have a season over 6 months and I drop monthly episodes. That way you can set something that feels reasonable to you and your workload, and you can tell folks that they should expect things from you monthly over the course of 6 months. Number 3, Leverage tools. You ain't got to do anything from scratch at this point. Many of us are working solo, or we're on small teams. And how are you leveraging the technology and tools to assist you in this work is a really important question to ask. There's so many tools and resources, free and paid, out there that can help you do the things you need to do. Project management software. I have project management software in my life to be able to create to-do lists and to be able to assign myself due dates and to be able to really sort of plot and plan weeks and months ahead about what I need to do to achieve a particular goal. So I've listed here Asana, Basecamp. There are a ton of different resources available to you to understand how you can manage a project or a campaign. Social media planning. We know we love social media, but we should be able to schedule and plan those things ahead of time and just let those things drop when we need to. So things like Hootsuite, Sprout Social, Buffer, they all have free versions, and then they all have paid versions that allow you to do much more expansive work in social media planning. Graphic and video design. Canva is the ruler of all of the things. If you don't want to do Photoshop, great. Canva is drag and drop and available to you. And sometimes if you're a nonprofit specifically, there are reduced or free versions of Canva for you to be able to use. As well, freelancers. Sometimes it's okay to not do everything yourself. If you need a graphic designer, if you need a logo that's been created, if you need a slide deck or a presentation, what you can do is you can actually solicit freelance work from other creatives who are also looking for gigs. So there's a great website called Fiverr that I like to use a lot that allows you to go and check out portfolios of creatives' work, find one that aligns with your aesthetic and your vision, and then engage with those folks at whatever cost you feel comfortable and at the rate that they have set, and say, hey, I need this work, here's when I need it done by, and then you can go through that process with somebody else and take it off of your plate. And then also paid advertisements. Let's not rely solely on organic sharing and organic posting. You can leverage, if you have a budget, you can leverage paid advertisements to really sort of do some of the heavy lifting for you in the in-between times of organic posting. What I like to say is, where it makes sense to pay for it, where it makes sense. If you don't have a budget, that's okay. Maybe you end up with, $50 here, or maybe you have a budget of a bigger pot of money. But where you can start to spread your resources, specifically your time and energy, do it. Number 4, let's take some risks. We have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So for artists in particular, and for creatives, we have to really start to get creative and innovative with how we're delivering our messages. So when a message is being delivered, should it be a graphic? Should it be a video? Should it be a blog post? We have to sort of get comfortable with trying different approaches to getting a particular message out. So if we know we're trying to get our new song out, perhaps what we need to do is we need to really rely on video as a medium instead of written narrative. Whereas if we are a researcher, or if we're someone who's living in the academic side of the arts and creative culture, perhaps written form, longer form narrative is actually more beneficial to your work. I think about this a lot when I think about social media platforms. There are quite a few now. So obviously we know the staples of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. But I like to say every social media platform isn't for everybody. So every nonprofit doesn't need to be on Snapchat, for instance. But you should be able to make a case for why you should be if you choose to be. But at the end of the day, if there's no return on investment, don't invest in it. Not yet, at least. But maybe like TikTok. TikTok is like a great alternative. User experience is really important as well. So there's a concept called A/B testing in user experience and user research that says you try the same tactic, but you make different tweaks and adjustments and see which one creates a better response. So I think about this sometimes with subject lines in emails. That's where you see it oftentimes. So if you're sending an email to your list of folks, your audience of folks, you might want to try subject line A for half of them and subject line B for the other half of them. And then you can look at the numbers and say, well, subject line B got more opens than subject line A. So maybe I need to start writing and crafting my messages more like subject line B. Same with the posting schedule, as I mentioned before. User experience is really dependent on what we're committing to. And if we're committing to a posting schedule, let's honor that commitment so that folks can meet us where we are. And then, at the end of the day, trial and error is the name of the game. And it has to be part of your process until you really start to figure out and find out what's good and what works. So the fifth one is about impact. So we want to be able to measure and track impact. Everything in the arts and culture sector revolves around, right now, impact. How and who is your work touching? Both quantitatively, so the numbers are good, but also qualitatively, like stories, understanding how your work is shifting thoughts and shifting opinions and shifting emotions. And at the end of the day, to keep it really real with y'all, it's a funding thing. So artists and nonprofits specifically are usually asked when they're trying to get a grant here or get funding over here, secure a sponsor here. They're usually asked by funders directly about what is the impact. So you should start to understand impact both as you're soliciting and trying to go after opportunities for funding, but also building impact and understanding impact in a reporting way at the end of processes. Because most funders will ask at the end, what did my giving you this funding do? How did it shift something? And then, if you can prove that you had a sizable impact, then they're likely to sort of revisit funding you again or funding you next time for more money. So impact is really important, and it's really part of every process at this point. So there's lots of tools for being able to understand your reach and your impact. Obviously, the numbers, we can go to Google Analytics and we can say, we had this many website visits from these different areas of the world. Folks spent this much time on our website. They clicked here, here, and here. That's a way of showing impact. We also can talk about that with social media. So most of those platforms that I mentioned earlier, and even natively inside of platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, they will show you internal analytics that will be able to support all of your impact reporting. But also, sometimes we just need to go and ask people directly. So surveys and focus groups are really important in being able to understand how your creativity and how your expression has reached folks in a deeper way. So being able to ask folks directly through surveys and say, hey, maybe I can get 5 folks who I know took advantage of this or saw my live performance or whatever it might be, and ask them some questions. Ask them how it made them feel. Ask them how that will inform how they move through the world going forward. Those things are also just as valuable as a website view or a click. So it's really important to be able to wrap that up in part of your process. So those are my 5 things, but there's one more thing. Every single good marketing effort for a creative should begin and end with a plan. Nothing should be piecemeal. Nothing should be throwing pasta at the wall and seeing what sticks. We have to be able to have a plan that both incorporates what we know works, but also what we want to try and innovate and do in trial and error. So a strong marketing plan is really in support of any work, and it should include these components. And write these components down so that you can revisit these things at the end and see if you were successful and make tweaks and adjustments for the future. Those components are, you got to have goals. What am I trying to do here? Am I trying to get my music into the world? Am I trying to get my play, the run of my show? Am I trying to get it sold out? What is the goal? What are the strategies? How do you imagine getting to that goal? And then what are the tactics? The tactics are the specific and individual efforts that support strategies and goals. What is your audience breakdown? Well, like we talked at the beginning, we got to know who we're talking to. And sometimes campaign to campaign or product to product or project to project, it might be a different audience. What are the outreach and key influence lists that we can pull? Who do we want to talk to that maybe we haven't talked to before, or that we didn't need to talk to before, but we do now? So I always make a list of influencers for every project at this point. Who can I reach out directly to and say, hey, I got this thing going on. I really need you to know about it. And it's really aligned with your vision, your values, your interests. I also take into account blind spots and competitors. You need to understand what other folks are doing, what's working for them. Also, what are my blind spots? What am I not taking into consideration that might creep up on me in the midnight hour? What are the risks? What if this isn't successful? What if I don't make my goal? Is that going to put me in a worse place than I started? Or do I have more flexibility to try new things and fail? Because failure is part of effective marketing. At some point you fail and you learn from it and you figure out how to move on from there and be better the next go round. Also, what is the budget? How much money do I have? Do I have no money? That's fine. We can figure out how to adjust a marketing plan for no money. But also maybe if I have 50 bucks, maybe if I have $1,000 of wiggle room here, you can figure out how the budget will impact your tactics and your strategies. And finally, what are the measures of success? At the end of the day, when you've released your art into the world, what do you want in return? Is success that you made everybody feel appreciated and seen? That's a measure of success, but we have to figure out how to evaluate that measure. Or is it that you want to make sure that 100 people who've never visited a theater before now have visited a theater because of your show? Whatever the thing is, we have to be able to explicitly say what our measures of success will be. And at the end of our process, evaluate for those measures. That will absolutely set you up for future success and make sure that all of your art and all of your creative expression is both being released into the world, but is being met with the eyes and ears that it needs to. So that's my 5 things. I will say that if you want to reach out to me on Instagram or Twitter, you can hang out with me at Josh Jenks, JoshJenks, or you can go to my website, joshuahenryjenkins.com, and see all the stuff that I've been up to, and send me an email. I'd love to always brainstorm and work with folks. So thanks for having me.
So when you started your presentation, you had mentioned you're a community organizer. I'd like to know whether is that role, is it intertwined with the director of marketing? Is it different, or what do you do as a community organizer?
Yeah, so that's usually shown up for me in my side work. So when I was the board chair for the Arts Administrators of Color Network, and I also was I still sort of serve as a communications liaison or consultant for the organization. So a lot of our time, because it was a baby organization, a lot of our time was spent cultivating and trying to build a community of arts administrators. So when I say arts administrator, I mean those who are working in marketing, those who are working in fundraising, those who are individual artists who are trying to figure out how to, manage their finances, any sort of aspect of the business of arts and culture work. We were trying to build a community of those folks. And so a lot of our time was spent trying to build that up. So a lot of my work has been aligned with that. I also started during the pandemic a virtual film space called Black Gay Stuck at Home that specifically screens on a bi-weekly basis films for a community of folks that started in the pandemic for those who might have been in the house and lonely, and now has grown and is still going 3 years in, every other week showing films to about 100 folks every Friday. So there's an aspect, I think, and you can't really divorce marketing from community engagement and community outreach and meaningful community connection. So it usually shows up in most of my work, but more specifically, it's shown up in those 2 ways.
Oh, that is interesting, and that's so genius. The film idea. Oh, I wish we had that over here. That's very interesting. So the other question will be, so for you to get all these 5 points together, did you learn it by yourself, or did you have a mentor who guided you? Or just walk me through how you came up with these 5 points.
Yeah, so I've always depended on both informal and formal mentorships. I think it's important to have a network of folks that you can always go to and ask for resources, but also sort of just learn from. I don't think we're reinventing the wheel ever. I think we're actually just sort of, updating things for new generations, new audiences. So there's so much to learn from those who have come before. So I lean on other arts marketers, other community building folks, both actively, but also folks who have done that work in the past and done it well. So there's a little bit of that, but then also I do a lot of stuff on my own too. Like, I built my own template for communications plans. But I did so looking at all of the available tools to me and finding something that worked for what I knew was going to be priority in my work. So I think it's a bit of a mix. Mentorship is so integral to professional and creative development. I don't think we can learn and do everything in a vacuum by ourselves. So I think we have to be able to have the intergenerational conversations specifically with those who have done the work before us so that we can do work now, but also so that we can make sure that those who are coming after us feel like they have the same sort of support system.
Okay, that's great. That's amazing that you're able to get, people who guide you through the work and through the process. So yeah, I think that is all the questions that I had, and maybe we can move to the next segment.